Movie buff specialist Phil and John are back, and today we continue going through our favorite 100 movies of all time, and we're at number 42. And we're going to be talking about Adaptation from 2002, the Charlie Kaufman Spike Jonze movie, and Mad Max Fury Road, George Miller's return to form after a very long time of not doing a whole lot of really much. Visually stunning, creatively writing stunning. We have two very different movies, but two masters of their medium, that's for sure. With Charlie Kaufman taking on the Orchid Thief and George Miller just deciding, hey, I'm going to make this movie look really, really cool because I can do whatever the hell I want. We're going to start with Adaptation, but John, I hadn't seen Mad Max Fury Road actually since theaters, and man, does that hold up.
It sure does. But we can definitely talk about that after we talk about Adaptation because, man, speaking of movies that hold up, anything written by Charlie Kaufman,
he just gets it. And so
yeah.
This is my movie. This is my number 42. I think on like one iteration of my top 100 that I did, I think I had this movie like in my 20s. I wouldn't be surprised if ultimately it ends up there again at some point. So Charlie Kaufman's interesting. 1999, he does Being John Malkovich. 2002, he does Adaptation. 2004, he does Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Literally three of the greatest screenplays ever written in the history of film.
Mm-hmm.
They just are, and there's really no denying it. Malkovich is my least favorite one, although there's so many people who just love that one. And I do love it, but it's just my least favorite out of the three. Something about that movie just really depresses me too much. But then he tried doing Synecdoche or however you say it, New York. Synecdoche, New York, because it's based on Schenectady, New York. And so he tries doing that movie, and it was his directorial debut and all of that, and Roger Ebert loved it, and it was a travesty in terms of box office, and he never really got another chance again. He did Anomalisa a couple years back, animated movie nominated for Best Animated Feature at the Oscars. And then he just did that movie on Netflix. What is it called? I Was Never Here or something like that? Or
I'm thinking of Ending Things.
I'm thinking of Ending Things. Thank you. I was getting that confused with the Joaquin Phoenix movie. But he has struggled to find a place to go. It's just been a struggle since then. But I don't think that anybody really was able to capture the neuroticism of like this early computer generation the way that Charlie Kaufman was. The thing that's interesting about his movies is they look at humanity in a way that we can see so clearly in 2022. And he was doing this so long before that. The anxieties of like technology that's coming on. We see that in Being John Malkovich. The anxieties of just feeling like a failure because now there's pressure put on you, as we see in Adaptation. And then just the pressures of society and the anxieties that come with that of trying to form a relationship in an era where it's not very easy to form relationships. He does it so masterfully, and he just gets into the human mind better than anybody I think has ever been able to do in film. We see it with Being John Malkovich, where he literally goes into John Malkovich's head. We see it in Adaptation, where he decides to write himself into a screenplay. And we see it in Eternal Sunshine with Joel Barrage and Clementine Krasinski, who is one of the greatest love stories, one of the greatest couples in a love story ever. This movie, to me, I said this about Mad Max in my review. Mad Max Fury Road shows what film can be. It is a visual masterpiece. It doesn't rely heavily on dialogue. It's a lot of grunting and one line and whatever, but it shows what film can be when you just have things happening on a camera and look how far we've come and what we can do. Adaptation shows what writing in film can be. This movie, so for anybody who's actually wondering, this movie was supposed to be an adaptation of The Orchid Thief. It really was supposed to be that. This was supposed to just be a simple adaptation of The Orchid Thief. And instead, Charlie Kaufman couldn't write it. Most of this movie is true until about the last act and the fact that Donald Kaufman doesn't exist. But everything that he packs into these 2 hours, all of the tropes, all of the things that you hear all the time in writing, don't use voiceover, don't create random characters, blah, blah, blah. All of this. We don't want the action. We don't want the drama. We don't want any of this. He is able to make just one of the greatest writing movies ever made and keep it so entertaining without feeling preachy. And then you're like, okay, well, where does the real Susan Orlean end and begin? Did he like the real Susan Orlean? Like, what was going on with that? What was going on with John LaRoche, who is a real person, who is now in a movie that he is not a real person? When you start to dissect the layers, it's absolutely unreal. And like I said to John, and John said to me when he was watching this, how does Donald Kaufman get an Oscar nomination? He's not even real. Because Charlie Kaufman put Donald Kaufman's name in the credits, the Oscars don't have a choice but to say it's Charlie and Donald Kaufman who are nominated, because that's whose name is in the credits. They do not have a choice. It's brilliant on every level. It just, the layers from top to bottom, it's ridiculous. And so this is, how do you do this with writer's block? How do you take writer's block and turn it into a masterpiece? It's just mind-blowing.
Yeah, for Charlie Kaufman to just take his experience attempting to adapt The Orchid Thief into a film and turn that experience into the film that is adaptation is just another level of thinking that most people are never going to get to. And better yet, most people who do get to that level can never make it as eloquently as Kaufman does, so that it is actually what gets made into the movie.
Yeah, and that's the thing. How does Susan Orlean see this and say, wait, what are you talking about? I thought you wanted to make my book into a movie. Like, how does she see this and say, okay, but that's like, okay, let's just think of the brilliance of the title of this movie, okay? Adaptation. Charlie Kaufman is adapting a book into a screenplay. Charlie Kaufman is adapting as he can't write the screenplay, so he has to write himself into the screenplay and do something completely different. Then he goes through the adaptation of man. He goes through the adaptation of plants and flowers and things like that. We have the adaptation of John LaRoche, who goes from being this guy who's obsessed with one thing. Then when it finally starts to hurt him, he just completely abandons it to go somewhere else. We have the adaptation of Susan Orlean, who is starting off as a real person and then turns into just a trope by the end of it. All of these, all like the brilliance of just that title and using the different meanings of what it means to adapt is just, it's just so unreal. And it's so hard to believe that this really did all come from one man's mind. Like, it is unbelievable to think one man sat down and just said, you know what? This is what I'm going to do. To create a fake brother because he didn't know what else to do, who's having success in a genre that he can't understand. And he's getting success with the girls. And he's everything that Charlie Kaufman can't be. Mm-hmm. And yet it packs these really emotional moments. I could go on and on about this screenplay. It's just so freaking good. And I don't know what else to say other than it's so freaking good.
I mean, a lot of it comes down to a lot of the little, I think when we look at Charlie Kaufman and his works and all of the works that we've named of Charlie Kaufman so far today, Charlie Kaufman is one of the greatest horror writers of all time without anyone realizing he keeps making horror movies. Mm-hmm. Charlie Kaufman's movies are all this like existential horror where it's like coming to terms with reality, realizing like how infinitely small you are and how you like success seems like it's always right there, but you can never quite reach it and everything like that. And when you watch a Kaufman movie, you just sit there and you think, wow, how does he understand me so well? Mm-hmm. And that's the terrifying part of watching these movies. The opening voiceover for adaptation, I listen to it, it's like, wow, this is just what I think every single day.
It's crazy. It's crazy. And to start off with that and just a black screen with the words at the bottom, just that voiceover. Yeah. Like, this is a movie that was supposed to be about plants, and instead it starts like that, and him sitting there. Can she see I'm sweating? Can she see it? She can see it. She knows I'm sweating. She thinks there's something wrong with me. Why did I do this? Why did I, like, just getting into all of that because that's how neurotic he is. And knowing that a lot of this isn't fictitious. A lot of this is real. Like, a lot of this is like really how Charlie Kaufman feels. Mm-hmm. I agree with you though. The existential dread that he's able to pack into these, like, one of my favorite parts of this movie is when he is talking into the recorder and he's talking, and then we have it. And we have Charlie Kaufman sitting fat and he's having conversation with this woman and blah, blah. And then he's listening back to it. And he's like, this is shit. I'm a fraud. I'm a failure. and knowing that that's actually how the movie starts. I mean, at the beginning of Mankind, and then oh, this is great. We got the fish, and like he just keeps going on, and that excitement, and then feeling like, nope, that's horrible. Nobody's gonna go for this, and then we know that they do ultimately go for it. It's like, okay, where does this story begin and where does this story end? Where, like, you could cut it in so many different ways and be like, no, this is how it all goes, but he is able to make it all work. That's the crazy part.
Mhm.
He makes all of it work. He makes the reality work. He makes the side stories work. He makes the New Yorker stuff interesting. He makes the Orchid Thief stuff interesting. He didn't want to turn it into a movie about drugs and love and car chases and whatever. And then that's what he does in the end, because there's no other way to do this movie other than to do it that way. And that's why he goes that route. And it's so tongue in cheek and it's so meta, but it is so brilliantly meta in a way that so many movies strive for and just fall flat on their faces. I don't feel like Charlie Kaufman is preaching at me. I feel like Charlie Kaufman is saying, hey, can you please help me? Because this is a freaking disaster.
Yeah, it does kind of just feel like this call for help the entire time. And rightfully so. I mean, he's coming off. I love the inclusion of like filming Malkovich at the time of this, because it just like, and that first scene we actually see Charlie Kaufman, where like we're on the set of Malkovich, and John Malkovich is just like explaining everything in the scene to everyone, and they're telling Kaufman to get out of the get off the stage and everything, right? It's just this entire, it just so perfectly encapsulates this idea of like the writers are just so in the background and they don't know what's going on. And like, despite the fact that Charlie Kaufman is coming off writing like this absolutely incredible film, he's still being pushed to the side and everything. And he's just has this cry of help or like wanting this attention, which Donald gets all the time. And he's wanting to write something and live up to what he just wrote with Malkovich. But he has this book which has nothing in it for him to adapt.
Yeah, exactly. And I also like, though, that this movie pretty much tells you that writers and like their own, like, oh, nobody loves me, nobody cares, is so much of in your head. Because what he's doing is he's saying, look at Donald. Donald's hanging out with Catherine Keener. And he's like, Catherine Keener's at my apartment. Catherine Keener is in my house. Yeah, because Catherine Keener is a normal person. She just happens to be an actress, but you treat her like something different. And your brother, who just treats everybody normal, he's friends with Catherine Keener and he's sleeping with the makeup girl. Who cares? He doesn't care. Charlie is doing it to himself. He is saying, oh, well, I can't possibly go talk to that person. I can't possibly go do this. To me, this is one of the best autobiographies ever written, ever. Because it goes to all the places that most people don't go to. I said this with The Graduate, right? The Graduate is a movie about something that people think about all the time. What would happen if when I came back home after graduating from college, I slept with a really hot neighbor? Whether you're a guy or a girl, I slept with a really, really hot neighbor. And then that movie says, okay, now let's do it. Let's see what would actually transpire. Charlie Kaufman does that here. He says, what would actually transpire if I was in this situation and I had to start just making stuff up out of thin air because there was no way to do it? And I love the scene where he's having the mental breakdown and you just see Chris Cooper go, crazy white man, or whatever the hell he yells. And like, it's just like, you can feel the intensity and it ratcheting up. But how many people try this and say, I'm just going to write myself into my own movie and I'll figure it out? M. Night Shyamalan is the king of it, even though he doesn't call anybody M. Night Shyamalan. That's what he does, though. It's, oh, I'll be this character who's going to say everything. Charlie Kaufman just took it and said, I'm now the main character of this because what I'm having to do here is more interesting than anything's on that paper. And I'm going to then bring all of that into it to talk about what the beauty is. And Spike Jonze, being as great of a director as Spike Jonze is able to give it justice and show off the beauty of everything that Charlie Kaufman was trying and failing to say.
Yeah, it's the kind of that idea that, like, you know, it's like a cardinal sin to write yourself into a story, despite the fact that you want to always write from experience. It's how you get the most authentic characters. But in this case, you have Charlie Kaufman breaching that rule, putting himself in the film, and then because of that, this film doesn't work without Donald's existence. And I love the fact that throughout this entire film, everything about Donald's character tells you that there is no Donald Kaufman.
Yeah.
Because if you're paying close attention to like what he's writing about, and like the fact that he's writing this cop movie with this like multiple personality thing, it's essentially Kaufman being like, yo, Donald doesn't exist. He's just a facet of my personality that's kind of there. Despite the fact that like Donald Kaufman does exist in this movie, in reality, it's just this part of Kaufman's personal identity. And he's just laid these little tiny things in the film that makes it so obvious when you actually know that's the fact. But if you had no idea, you would just assume Donald's this other screenwriter in the family.
Are you familiar with Uwe Boll?
Yes.
Okay. So everybody hates Uwe Boll. Uwe Boll has made nothing but garbage, right? Like he has never made anything but bad movies. House of the Dead, Alone in the Dark, and The Name of the King. They're all terrible movies, but he kept making movies. And it was one of those things where the critics would always pan him, but a lot of critics are failed writers who are frustrated that they're not able to go and just do this. And what Charlie Kaufman is essentially saying in this movie is, I could have it so easy if I would just write a basic thing that people actually want to see. Obviously, this was before the days of Rotten Tomatoes, but imagine if Rotten Tomatoes existed while Kaufman was writing this. He'd be sitting there going, Donald, that's a 44% on Rotten Tomatoes. And Donald would be saying, yeah, but it's going to make $150 million opening weekend. Like that was the difference here. And we've seen it. Unfortunately, it actually has changed Charlie Kaufman's career because Charlie Kaufman hasn't had much of a career because his commercial success just really wasn't there. Being John Malkovich was a massive commercial success. Yeah. Adaptation was a pretty solid one. And then Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is obviously like an all-time classic of the genre. But beyond that, he has had no commercial success. And this is his self-awareness of knowing that if he would just sit down and write it, the makeup lady's going to love it, and she's going to tell all of her friends to go see it, and Catherine Keener is going to want to be in it because she likes Donald Kaufman, and that's fine. But he can't do it. He cannot bring himself to do it because he's so invested in the art. Don't say industry. Don't go to these writers' conferences. Don't do this. Don't do that. Blah, blah, blah. It has to be so perfect because that's how seriously he takes it. I think that's what's so hard to explain, but it's also like when we sit down and do this podcast, everybody likes movies, let's be real. But we're those snobs who are like, no, this is a good movie, that's a bad movie, because of how passionately we care about movies. That's what Charlie Kaufman is saying. He so passionately cares about writing that he can't fathom ever stooping to that level, even though part of him knows that if he would just go to that level, he'd probably be a happier person.
Yeah, especially, it's really funny because as, you know, these people who really appreciate movies, whenever Donald talks about a screenplay, you think about it and it's like, man, that sounds like the worst movie ever.
But it also sounds like something you saw in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Exactly. And that was where my thought was going. It was like, oh, like I've seen this movie already and I know it's bad. But that's the kind of like genius of everything that Kaufman's sculpting in this, is that he wants you as the audience to realize how bad those movies are, so that you can appreciate how good his movies are.
Yeah. And I will say, didn't totally land with adaptation. I would say out of the three, this is probably the least loved one out of all of them. This is the one that, garnered, I think, like the least critical acclaim, even though it obviously got a lot of critical acclaim. This is the one that got the least amount of it just because it was so freaking weird. And it was pretty pretentious. I mean, let's be real. It is very pretentious. But, I mean, think about this. He's taking these shots at Robert McKee. What was the first screenwriting book I bought when I was going into college? It was Story by Robert McKee, because this movie made you say, well, shit, I better go look up what that guy did or what that guy is doing. I don't know who the hell Robert McKee is. I don't think Robert McKee's ever done anything. And I'll be honest, Story, pretty dated. Makes sense, but it's pretty dated if you go back and read it. Some of the movies he talks about and things like that, you're like, why? I get what he's trying to say, but why? But to bring that character in and make him just a gigantic asshole who is screaming at him and cursing him out and doing all that stuff, to take these real people and say, this is them. Robert McKee really did write Story. Susan Orlean really did write The Orchid Thief. I'm going to give you some of their real, but then I'm also going to kind of rip them apart and make them look like assholes. And it's going to be up to them if they're going to actually let me do this. And they did, because they saw the brilliance of what was going on with this. And the Robert McKee scene, such a short role for Brian Cox. One of my favorite scenes in movie history when he's sitting there and he just starts doing the whole speech about every day people find love, people lose love. A child watches his mother shot in front of him on the steps of their house, like all of that. He's like, if you can't find that, then why am I wasting my time with your movie? And he just sits there. It's so good. And I love the oh, you shouldn't be doing, blah, blah, blah. You're an idiot. You're a fool. You're here, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, and voiceover, God help you if you use voiceover. There is nothing lazier than voiceover. People miss when that came out, that changed the game with voiceover. People really started to take it seriously as like, oh, voiceover shouldn't be used. He's right. Voiceover is bad. They missed the point that if you use it as well as Charlie Kaufman can use it, you can make a whole freaking movie about voiceover. Some of the best movies ever involve voiceover because they're done by Scorsese or they're done by Charlie Kaufman. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, voiceover is this technique that, when done incorrectly, just ends up as an exposition. We talked about it several times.
Shawshank was the big one we talked about it with, yeah.
Yeah, it's an exposition dump. And how Kaufman does it differently, Kaufman more kind of takes like a James Joyce approach to it, really. It's just like this stream of consciousness. And that's the type of thoughts that voiceover really helped to show, where we get just constant going on and on, nonstop thought process. And it has those moments where it like flips around on us. Because let's be real, not many people think straightforward all the time. We're always thinking about one thing and then it's like, oh, but wait, what about this thing? Yeah. And that's what Kaufman's really capturing in the voiceover in this film.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love like the little like dream sequences too, which always end with him masturbating. But I love the little dream sequences of like him everywhere he's going and everything that he's doing. Like these visions, these dreams he has for a happier life that he is it's just so out of reach for him. And one of my favorite lines is the Donald Kaufman part at the end when he's talking to him and they're about to die and he's talking to him and he's like, that time in high school when you're talking to whoever, he's like, oh yeah, I loved her. And it's like, yeah, well, you were so happy, blah, blah, blah. And you walked away and she started making fun of you. And his lineup, that was her business. She couldn't touch that I loved her. Whatever she wanted to feel about me, that was her business. Like that is such a brilliant line to define like this neuroses and this nervousness of somebody who's like, but what if they laugh at me? Who cares? That's them. That's not you. You're not them laughing at you. You're what you're laughing at. That's the difference. And it's so well defined in this moment that we know is now we're outside of the reality of this movie. Yeah. We know we're outside of the reality. And yet he's able to bring you in with one of the realest moments in any of his movies and make it feel like this really could have authentically happened and how powerful that moment is because of what a turning point it is. I'm telling you, that is the line. Like this movie's 20 years old now, which really makes me sad, but it's 20 years old. And when you look at that, just think about that line and then go through the rest of your life. It's a game changer. Now, did it change anything for Charlie Kaufman? Probably not. He's probably just as neurotic as he was 20 years ago, but it's a game changer.
Yeah, definitely. It's when we start dissecting like the themes of this movie, it's really quite enlightening how it approaches because like we have that aspect of Donald being like, it doesn't matter. Like the perception of other people isn't really all that important. We just kind of think it is all the time. And then we have the theme that really caught on to me was this idea of like the disappointment of expectation. And like, this is again, like getting into like this existential dread that Kaufman likes throwing out there. Because like, for me watching this movie, it's a lot of like the futility of existence. It's like, you can never really achieve anything. And then the fact that like, when you have this expectation, we get that scene where they go into the swamp to find the flower and she's so excited to see the flower and then just like, it's just a flower. And it's like that moment of expectation just dropping there. And Kaufman's just balancing this idea of like, be excited for things, enjoy things, but you kind of want to keep them just at an arm's length because once you get there, it's just going to disappoint you.
Well, and that's the thing. There's so much with the expectations versus reality, right?
Yeah.
You overhype things in your head in both directions. You either think things are going to be way better than they are or way worse than they are because of however you're perceiving it.
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard to have a level head about a lot of things. And John LaRoche is the negative. Charlie Kaufman is the negative. Donald and Susan Arlene are the positive. Donald stays there, but then Susan Arlene starts to be corrupted by the negative, while Charlie Kaufman is moving more towards the positive. And they're becoming more level as it goes on, even though Susan Arlene needs the orchid stuff to become more level.
Yeah.
So, but that's the thing. Like it's these high highs and these low lows, and it's about how do we find it where the highs are high, but they're not disappointing in retrospect, and the lows aren't so low that we almost feel like we can't dig ourselves out from them.
Yeah, those are the type of thoughts that like all of us struggle with, especially now, 20 years later. There is no way Kaufman could have predicted how much this like idea of expectation and everything would hit once we got into like the social media age. And we're always like presenting a false out, and we're always thinking about people as we're putting people up on pause because we only see the like most positive aspects of their life all the time. We're always kind of like putting them in a pedestal and like wondering why we can't hit that. And we have those fantasies, right? We have those fantasies of like going to the orchid show with Judy Greer and then just like, going at it in the forest behind it. And then like, it's then met with that reality, which then just devastates him because he's like, you want to go to this orchid show? Nope, I was just being nice because I'm your waiter.
Yeah.
And it's all multiplied like 100-fold nowadays because of social media.
Absolutely. And I mean, you look at this was a great year for movies, and 2002 was a great year. I mean, the early 2000s to me were some of the best. Late 90s and the early 2000s, 99, 2001. We both had 2000 movies on here. 2002, we haven't even gotten to my top movie from 2002. But the reason why I love this year is because of how timeless the movies are. You could go back and you could watch some of these movies from the 90s that are great movies, but they're not timeless necessarily. Adaptation is a timeless movie. It doesn't matter. It does not matter when that movie was made. It is a timeless movie. The Hours is a timeless movie. The Pianist is a timeless movie. That's why I have so many movies from this year on my list. And yeah, like a movie like Adaptation, it's actually probably grown in its effectiveness because of the world that we live in now. And that's pretty wild.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
There are just little things in this movie that I really appreciate too. I really enjoyed the Chekhov's gator in this movie. Where the first time they're in the swamp, like you see the gator, and then it comes back, and of course that's how LaRoche gets like mauled by the gator later on. I'm like, I'm very glad this gator became relevant.
Yeah, it's there the whole time. The danger,
yeah.
it. But what does it mean? But let me wrap this one up so that we can move on. For Oscars, this was the year where Chicago won Best Picture. Nicolas Cage. See, this is where I'm so excited to watch the whatever movie Nick Cage has coming out that's pretty much about him, the unbearable weight of success or something like that. I can't wait because Nicolas Cage gets a bad rap, and he's been in some terrible freaking movies. But like when he's on, he is on. And this movie, Leaving Las Vegas, Bad Lieutenant. I don't know if anybody's ever seen Bad Lieutenant. He is so freaking good. Bringing Out the Dead, which is a Scorsese movie. He is on. He ended up losing to Adrian Brody for The Pianist, which I'll be talking about The Pianist in a little bit. This script lost to The Pianist. Now, I probably disagree with that one just because of the level of this script, but I can't really argue it too much because The Pianist is a perfect movie. So that is what it is. Jean LaRoche, Chris Cooper won the Oscar for this one 3 years after he didn't win the Oscar for American Beauty. He did not win that one. It went to Michael Caine. It should have went to Tom Cruise. But then he comes back and he wins it this year over Ed Harris in The Hours. Paul Newman, the last time he was ever going to be nominated, and everybody knew it, for Road to Perdition. Christopher Walken, who was incredibly popular in Catch Me If You Can. And John C. Reilly in Chicago, who a lot of people actually thought was going to win it. So just something to think about there. And then what do you call it? For Best Supporting Actress, Meryl Streep was nominated and had no chance in hell because of Catherine Zeta-Jones in Chicago. So it is what it is. But a lot of nominations, still was probably the least well received out of all of Kaufman's movies, especially then with Eternal Sunshine coming up next. And I think Eternal Sunshine might have actually garnered fewer nominations, but it ultimately won Best Original Screenplay, which is, in my estimation, bigger than supporting actor. So anyway, Chris Cooper, though, his John LaRoche is great. I love it.
Yes,
it's so
absolutely.
outlandish, and it just showed off how good Chris Cooper really was. He was on a heater back then, that's for sure. Okay. What was the best thing you watched this week?
Saturday may have been the best movie watching day I've ever had.
Okay.
I started the day with Wild Strawberries.
Okay.
Which Phil has already gone on about how incredible that film is several times on the podcast. And it's absolutely incredible. It's this great meditation on just like life and everything. And I can see that movie easily making my top 100 when I redo my list. I finished that night off with Casablanca, which is just one of the best movies ever made. And then I went and saw Everywhere, Everything, All at Once this weekend. And that movie had been getting a lot of attention. It's been talked about a lot by a lot of people about how fantastic it was. It somehow still exceeded my expectations.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about that one. I got to go check that one out. So don't spoil it for me because I do want to see it. I've heard nothing but good things though, and then I saw your review and I was like, all right, maybe this is actually good. So
yeah, it had been one that had been on my radar for a while. I had known about it coming out for a while. No one else seemed to, and then it started picking up steam with its premiere at South by Southwest, and everyone seems to be loving this movie. It's a movie that you go see, and then you kind of just want to tell other people to go see it.
Well, I will go see it at some point. So, yeah. I only watched 3 movies other than what we had. 3 incredibly different movies. I can't really stress that enough. I gave them all 3 stars in their own way. I watched Ice Age, which, it's funny. I did laugh a lot. The animation looks terrible now. It looks like a really bad, it looks like a video game from the early 2000s. That's the problem. Like, it's not really bad, but you're like, wow, this was groundbreaking. And it certainly is not now. I watched How the West Was Won, which I didn't realize was like half documentary, half not. Very weird movie going experience. Breathtaking movie. 3 hours long. It feels 3 hours, but it's pretty cool. I don't know. It's all about just like American history though. And Spencer Tracy narrates it. So I'm like, well, am I watching a movie or a documentary? But it was still good. John, you would absolutely despise it. There's no doubt about it. And then I watched Midnight Express, which is the Oliver Stone written movie. I think he won the Oscar, was nominated for it. Either way, about the guy the American who's trying to smuggle hash from Turkey back into America, gets caught, goes into a Turkish prison, and all hell ensues. That was probably my favorite that I watched this week. It's not great. It's good. It was nominated the same year as The Deer Hunter and Coming Home and all of those movies. And it was a good movie. It was solid. Not nearly as disturbing as its what do you call it? Like its reputation is. It's just not quite there. Although it is still very disturbing. Randy Quaid's in it, gives a really good performance. John Hurt was nominated for an Oscar and was like phenomenal as like a half heroin addict, half just like out of his mind guy. The last half hour is crazy, but everything before that, I'm like, yeah, I've seen this now up to this point. Like I've seen The Wire, or not The Wire. I've seen Oz. So like, I'm good, but still a really good movie and a solid look at like, hey kids, don't do drugs, so that's it. Tell me all about Mad Max Fury Road.
Mad Max Fury Road is a really interesting movie for me. But when it came out in 2015, I had never seen any of the Mad Max films. I knew about like the reputation of them. My introduction to like the Mad Max mythology was in the CGI show Reboot and the season 2 premiere Bad Bob. And like, so I kind of knew like the aesthetic of Mad Max and everything. I wasn't really sure what I was getting into with this. It was getting a lot of hype, so I went and saw it. And then I immediately went and saw it again. And I just knew at that point, this movie, if you describe the plot of this movie, there's no way this movie should work. This is a 2-hour car chase. And what George Miller is able to do in this, it's baffling. Like you said earlier, it just shows what a movie can be. He's so minimal on dialogue. He lets the visuals and the acting kind of take priority over everything in this movie. He's taken this world that was already established in his previous films and is introducing it to this new generation who may not have seen them.
Mm-hmm.
And his world building is so complete. I watched the other Mad Max movies this week, and let me tell you, there is more character development in the first 5 minutes of this movie than there are in all 3 of those other ones.
Yeah.
And he just creates this movie that tells a complete story with a beginning and end, but he's doing it in like this folklore aspect where Max is the titular character, but never feels like the primary protagonist of this film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels like it's Charlize Theron's movie. It's Furiosa's movie.
Absolutely.
For sure. And isn't Furiosa getting like a movie or something like that? Am I wrong on this?
Yeah, I think it's supposed to come out next year or something like that.
Something like that. Okay, yeah. So I love what this movie was and how much it surpassed my expectations. So when I went to see this movie, I wasn't going to go see it. And then I saw it was getting a lot of hype, and I was like, okay, I had never seen either of the Mad Maxes or any of the 3. Sorry, Thunderdome still is there. But I hadn't seen any of those movies before I went and saw this one. And I was like, well, screw it. I'm just going to go see it. It's getting good hype and whatever. I remember sitting there and just being like, wow, that is an adrenaline rush of a movie. Like, that is all it is. It's just adrenaline the whole time. You're just like, and it's like insane. So much fun from beginning to end. And, but what I loved and what surpassed my expectations was the fact that Max is there, but he's just there. He's not the most interesting character out of all of them. I like the little crazy moments that he has that proves that he's mad or whatever. But it's Furiosa and it's her girls and it's Nicholas Holt's character who is so good in this movie and, you know, endlessly quotable, obviously. What a lovely day and all that stuff. But for me, and this is what I always say with this movie, because being that I have adaptation at number 42, I'm obviously bigger on writing than I am necessarily on visuals. This is one of the most breathtaking visual movies ever made because it's all actually being done. That's the craziest part. So much of this is actually in camera, but again, that's what creates timeless great movies. Lawrence of Arabia wouldn't be as good if they just put in a bunch of CGI people half the time. Yeah. It wouldn't be as good if it had a green screen background. Mad Max was just like, screw it. We're going to do it all. And when they're doing the things on the big swingy poles and they're dropping the grenades, and it's like, how in the world are they doing this? That's what I like when I go into a movie. When I don't know the answer to that question. When I say, how in the world are they doing this? And I don't know. That's a great movie. This is, without a doubt, I would say, top 5 visual movies, maybe, definitely of like the last 20 years, since 2000. Yeah. It might be top 5, though, of all time. Like, it really might. Like, this is up there with Space Odyssey and, like, I don't know, whatever else you want to throw in that bunch, depending on what you think is visual. To be able to do this and the expanse of the scenery and that one scene, it's so haunting. And it's literally 2 seconds of like the bog with the guys walking on those
crow walkers. Yeah.
The crow walkers. It's unbelievable. This movie visually is just stunning. And would I have it higher if there's a little bit more story? Yeah. But I also don't think that you need more story because we get it. We know exactly what's going on. It's at its heart, it's ultimately like a feminist movie. How are we going to get through this? And it's just fun. It's just fun from start to finish. And it never lets up. And it doesn't overstay its welcome. It's crazy how it does everything it's supposed to do. It really does do everything it's supposed to do.
Yeah, that's the really interesting thing about this. This is it's safe to say this is the highest ranked pure action movie we have on either of our lists. And a lot of that does come from like these like visual elements that really elevate this film. But the action sequences lend into that visual aspect so much because these car chase scenes are just so real. They're so authentic. You always feel this like tension of like, are they going to get away? What's going on? And then when they just like turn around and they're just going straight at them to get back to,
yeah.
that
Get
place
back
that
to the
the
whatever it's
Citadel.
called. Yeah.
It's just it's so it's so enthralling. It's so invigorating. This is going there and coming back. That's the entire plot of this
That's
movie.
it.
And it's still so engaging for the full 2-hour run because there's just enough of these characters. It's visually stunning and it's so different. That's the big thing that really gets me is there are so for this movie that's just on this one road the entire time. Every single sequence is so visually different than the ones that precede it and the ones that follow it that it never feels like it doesn't feel as contained of a film as it truly is.
Well, because you're moving and it has a video game feel to it where
Yeah.
it seems like it's successively getting more difficult.
Mhm.
Every time they get to a new place, it gets a little bit harder. Every time they overcome one thing, it gets a little bit tougher. And I think that's what keeps it so entertaining, though, is that we're not just seeing the same thing over and over again. It is getting progressively different. But this movie just shows you don't need to make something complicated. I say this all
No.
the time on this podcast, but so many early writers and directors, they're so obsessed with, okay, how can I be different and unique? There is nothing different about the story to this movie. We have seen it a million times before. This just has different words for it and calls them half-bloods or half-lives or whatever they are, and that's it. We've seen this, though. Man with power, corrupt. His people in his society are trying to get out, so they run away and they try to start up let's destroy everybody. We've seen this. And yet, he is able to do it in a stunningly creative way. And that's what you need to do. You don't have to be different. You just have to be creative. And it's funny, too, because when you look at George Miller's filmography, yeah, he made the first three Mad Maxes. Like, he did that. Mad Max, The Road Warrior, Beyond Thunderdome. He did that. And he did The Witches of Eastwick and Lorenzo's Oil and Babe, Pig in the City and Happy Feet and Happy Feet 2. And that's all he did.
Yeah.
That's all he did. And then he turned around and he made this movie. It's almost like he was just waiting until the technology was ready for him. And once it was, he turned around this movie. And it's a fantastic watch. It is so much fun. And you have really A-list actors who are giving you everything they have with as little as they're given. But I feel like I'm watching real people. They don't need to have the pointless dialogue. I don't need a love story. I don't need anything like that. He's a rogue warrior, man. That's it. He comes, he helps, he leaves. He wanted to stay on his own. That's what he wanted. And so that's what he went and did. And Furiosa, she got what she wanted in the end. It's entertaining.
It is. It's entertaining. It follows a plot. We have so many movies that are just so depressing on our top 100s, and this isn't one of them. This is like, it has a feel-good moment at the end. It keeps you, it's just fun. And like, that is something that sometimes just penetrates a list like this. You and I both look at movies through a different lens than a lot of people. And we look at them and we look at their, like the artistry that goes into them. But this was a movie that, yes, has that artistry, but was just universally praised for how fun it is.
Yeah, it's always funny, like when you look back at some of these years where it's like, what movie wins Best Picture, which this was the Spotlight year, which again, after watching this, I'm just like, how in the world does that happen? Obviously I have The Revenant in my top 100. So that's, that was my top movie of that year. I love Room. I love Brooklyn. I think Brooklyn is one of the most underrated movies maybe ever. I really love that movie. I think Saoirse Ronan is just perfect in that. But I just I look back at some of these years where it's like, okay, what won and what was it competing with? La La Land versus Moonlight. This year it was Spotlight versus The Revenant. The year before when it was Birdman, I forget exactly what was Birdman. Birdman was battling it out with something, and Birdman ultimately pulled it out. Boyhood, Birdman versus Boyhood, like all of that. And then you look and you're like, okay, but what was the movie that didn't really have a chance that actually probably deserved it in the long run?
Yeah.
This is that movie. The Grand Budapest Hotel is that movie, or Whiplash. Whiplash could be that movie. With the year with what do you call it, La La Land and Moonlight, you can make the argument for, I don't know, Hell or High Water, Manchester by the Sea. Like, those aren't as obvious, but Hell or High Water launched Taylor Sheridan to like another level. I mean, he'd already been making good movies, but this was like, oh, okay, like Taylor Sheridan is somebody to really be looking at here. It's just funny, like, what this movie, it got all the technical stuff, but nobody really thought George Miller was going to take it home. Nobody thought the movie was going to take it home. And I still prefer The Revenant, but when you watch this, you're like, George Miller could have easily beaten Iñárritu and nobody would have been mad about it. And I just don't know how. I mean, again, we just watched Spotlight. You had it on your list. I have a hard time saying Spotlight is a better movie than this movie. And I'm based on my list. Everybody knows I am not an action movie person. I am a person who is like story. It's a hard thing for me to say that Spotlight is a better movie than this.
Yeah, I totally understand that. I mean, I do say this is a better movie than Spotlight. Obviously, it's higher on my list. And a lot of it comes down to, like, there are so many different ways to make a movie. And no, I'm not much of an action person either. I have a few smatterings of them with like the James Bond movies and things like that. But for the most part, like, I like slow cinema. I don't need plot. Give me like stupid slow artistry with like barely any talking. That's what I like. And that is what this movie does in an action setting. And it's so fascinating because of that. And I do think a lot of that does come down to like Tom Hardy's performance in this. So subtle, but so strong. He barely says any words in the entire movie, but you know everything about his character. Yeah, some of that's because of the voiceover at the beginning that kind of like sets the stage for everything, which is fine. We kind of needed that world building. But then the rest of that world building is through all of these little characters that he introduced. We never have that exposition telling us, this is Immortan Joe, and this is what's going on here. You're just introduced to Immortan Joe. You see how the people are responding to him. You see his reaction to seeing Furiosa go off the road. And all of a sudden, you know everything you need to know for this movie to work.
Yeah, I mean, and to be able to tell a 2-hour story with almost all visuals is not easy to do. It's a reason why, like, a movie like The Artist, I actually give a lot more credit than most people do, because it didn't rely on what today's audience relies on, which is listening. Think about how many people watch movies now and they're staring at their phone for 30 minutes of the 2-hour runtime. It happens all the time. I hope they're not doing it in a theater, although down here they probably are. But, you know, if you're watching it at home, a lot of people are staring at their phone. They're checking, who texted me? What do I have going on here? And that changes how you view a movie. But George Miller said, I don't care. This is what we're going to do. And if you don't watch it, that's your problem. If you miss something, that's on you. And like you said, there's no big yes, at the beginning we have the voiceover of Mad Max, but even what he says doesn't really make any freaking sense. It doesn't seem like it has anything to do with what we're actually watching happen for the rest of the movie. It doesn't set us up for anything more. And I just think that he's like you said, with the side characters and the witness me stuff and the chrome on the teeth and all that. It's like, man, I don't need to know why they're doing it. I just know it means something to them. And that's all that matters. I don't need to know why Furiosa lost her arm. I don't need a pointless backstory about that. I just know she did. She lost it so long ago and drives that truck so much that it's literally made an indent into the truck. Like, I don't need to know any of this. I don't need to know how Joe came to power. That doesn't matter to me. Or why they're half-life and why they're not full life and why they're being drained and they have to take it from these other. I don't need to know it. I just know it. I just know it's happening. And I know it matters to these people. And that's what's ultimately important. And we still don't really know what Max's motivation is. Max's motivation by the end of that movie, to me, it just feels like he wants to be left alone and he just wants to live. And now he has made that happen. And that's all that matters to him. But we get to see that through the eyes of everybody else because at its core, Max is not that interesting. Tom Hardy gives a good performance and they make him the side character in a movie that holds his name. It's a smart thing to do. And not for nothing, just goes back to further prove even more that Tom Hardy should have won Best Supporting Actor this year for The Revenant. because he should have gotten it for The Revenant and for this movie. And they should have just said, okay, Tom, you deserved it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And a lot of it comes down to the fact that, like, Max has never been an interesting character. Even in the original trilogy, he's not an interesting character. And the first Mad Max movie is not good. It is a steaming pile of a movie. It feels like it was made for $100 in someone's backyard. And everything we know about Mad Max comes from Road Warrior and from Beyond Thunderdome. And like that aesthetic we're used to, the post-apocalyptic setting and everything. And what this movie does better than those, this movie establishes a much more understandable world than those previous movies did. Because it immediately establishes, in Road Warrior, the big thing they're looking for is gasoline. That's the big resource they're vying for. In this movie, it's water.
Yeah.
We're talking about an essential thing for life, and it tells you so much about why all these people are there. And why all these people are bending to the whim of Immortan Joe is because he has the resource they literally need to live.
And then he's telling them, don't become addicted to it.
Yeah. And then these women who are racing, they're trying to go someplace where there's water, the green place. And the moment when they find out the green place is that place with the crow walkers and stuff.
Yeah.
Devastating.
So good.
Absolutely devastating. Because it also leads into this folklore that George Miller is really creating, of this idea that, like, you know, things seem better than they are. And sometimes you just don't realize that what you really need is back where you are and back home. Just you need that power structure, right? And you need that shift in who's controlling it. It's genius storytelling in the most minimal ways. And it's even like these character moments with like the War Boys and like Nicholas Holt's character. I don't know if you realize this. Do you realize how less white he gets throughout the movie?
Yeah.
And like he becomes, because they have that stark, haunting white visage on all these War Boys. And the further along into the movie we get, the less color Nicholas Holt has. And all of a sudden, like, he looks more human as we finally get to the end of the movie. It's those little storytelling elements that George Miller really capitalizes on in this film.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I like the idea of the War Boys a lot. I like that. Like really, it's funny because like Nicholas Holt and Tom Hardy, they're opposite sides of this. Yes. And then you have Charlize Theron and her people who are just like, let's just get through it. And we need to get, like, we want to be safe. But you know, these other two who have very different reasons for like why they want to either help or not help. You know what I mean? Like they just want to get what they want. And Nicholas Holt's character, his desires for somebody who's like that, you know, villain who's not a villain, whatever the name for that is, where it's not the Walter White thing. It's something different. You know, it's like it's somebody who we're being told is a villain, but they're not actually a villain because they have their redemptive arc. And to see that play out the way it does, and where he's just like, no, witness me. Like, I need to do this. I'm going to get to do that. He touched me. He looked at me, all this. Like, we see the obsession that all these people have and why they're willing to be these like half human things that are just going to keep following this guy, even when it seems like they should turn and run. And then he finally fails and he says, this isn't worth it anymore. And the reaction he gets, the embarrassment, the shame, all of that. And then he finally gets a chance to save somebody. And the part where he just says, witness me. And he looks right at that one girl and he turns the wheel. It shouldn't be as powerful as it is. But because of what we watched for the whole first hour and 45 minutes of that movie, it is. The ending should be so anticlimactic. They get there, Charlize Theron goes up and Tom Hardy walks away. And yet it works perfectly because that's what those characters are. They don't need to say anything else. There is nothing between them. They're not going to keep in touch. They're not going to rule the world together. They're just done. And I don't know. Like, I can't complain about any of the decisions that were made in this movie.
No, it's just, it really goes to show how much restraint George Miller had in making this, especially when you look at those previous ones that he made. Because let me tell you, Beyond Thunderdome, I said the first Mad Max was bad. Ooh, Beyond Thunderdome, also very bad. Because he went too far. He made Max. He went into this like Max is this folk hero, but then we get like half a movie of children running the entire show, and it's awful. But this time we have Max present the entire time, he's working with this incredibly strong. The female cast in this film is outstanding. All of them. I forgot Zoe Kravitz was in this movie.
Yeah,
and we're just watching these like very strong performances of these very strong female characters who are fighting against this patriarchy they have been enslaved to, where they have literally just been breeding animals for this warlord who is trying to maintain his power. And we're just seeing them. We see their hesitation in Max, and a part of that's because of Max is completely irrelevant to them. He's this one. He was a blood bag. He was literally an item in this society, and he only helps them because he literally has no other choice.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of this, because there's so much restraint there. George Miller could have kept like this resentment between the woman and all the men, but we see how the women are interacting with the men and changing these men and changing these male characters so that they become stronger characters because of those relationships that are built throughout the movie. And because we don't have any love plot weighing down this film at all, it feels so natural.
Yeah. The biggest thing, I mean, and we'll be talking about a movie in 2 weeks of mine that is The Descent. And the big reason that I did that is because it doesn't have a love plot. And I think that is something that, a lot of writers just do because sometimes they're forced to by production and stuff like that. But they feel the need to have some sort of romantic relationship. We don't need it. You don't need it. You can just have a regular movie. And like, especially in movies too that like deal with like different genders. You have Max and you have Furiosa. They're like your two main characters. They don't need to have anything else. Like, why do they? It's like the Terminator. They don't have a love story between Sarah Connor and the Terminator. They don't need to. They don't need to. And it's like, that's the important element of this. Like, to keep that out, you keep them as who they are. And you don't let them get mushy for no reason. Her moments are her moments, and his moments are his moments. In this world, it would feel out of place for anybody to give a damn about anybody.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of like this world, I love the world building that goes into the individualization of all these vehicles in this movie. Not a single vehicle looks the same as another one. They were all built incredibly differently. They all reflect their drivers. I love the different aesthetic in the costuming for the bullet farmers and the gas towners and the Citadel residents. There's so many little details in this movie that just enhance this world.
Yeah, I'm all about it. I think it's a super entertaining movie. I'm interested to see what's going to happen with these other like iterations that are going to be coming out shortly. It seems like there's a bunch of like Mad Max stuff lined up. This was something nobody knew they needed. Nobody knew they wanted. Even the super diehard fans of Mad Max didn't know that they wanted this. And we got it. And it's awesome. And it's great. And it's super interesting. And it's going to be one of those classics because those visuals are ridiculous. They are absolutely stunning. And it's 7 years already, which is crazy to think about, but it's already been out for 7 years and didn't look a day over anything.
No, not at all. And, I mean, that's the beauty of practical stunts and effects.
Yeah.
They never look bad because they're always done in camera.
Yeah. It's huge. It really is. So, well, let's talk about next week.
Yeah.
And stuff that is practical and done in camera. The Evil Dead is John's movie next week, 1981. And I have Breaking Away, which is 1979. These are different. Both very low budget, though. So this should be a fun one. Just two different genres, that's for sure. Excited to talk about these two movies. Can't wait. Very interesting coming up. Also fun that The Evil Dead is on the heels of a Mad Max movie. They were kind of like of the same genre, era, not genre, era.
Yeah.
But yeah, Breaking Away is really fun. Anyway, so that's what I got. Can't wait to see that next week. We'll let you know like what day and all that fun stuff as we get closer. But otherwise, Thank you all for listening. John, thanks for the podcast. And we'll see everybody next week.